Welcome to the Feeling Lighter podcast. I'm Coach Tyler here with Dr. Lisa, as always. How are you, Dr. Lisa?
I'm doing really good.
Really
How are
good.
you?
I love your smile. It's so every time I get to look over, you just got this amazing smile.
You're so sweet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And while I love smiling and enjoying all the good that life has to offer, we're going to talk today about emotions, about trauma, about healing, about all kinds of stuff. We'll have to wait and see how it all unfolds. Yeah. Because I think it's so important that we give ourselves permission to process all that stuff because it allows us to connect more deeply with other people. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm really excited for our guest. And something I've been doing lately is printing out some of the things that this guest has said and using this as a way to slide into the conversation. And I like this way to slide into the conversation. So our guest said, sometimes it can be really hard to know whether a boundary is supporting our sense of self or if it's just protecting us from accessing painful feelings that we may really benefit from actually feeling. Silvy, welcome to the podcast. And can you expand on that post a little more? Why should people focus on that? And how do you discern between those two things?
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me first and foremost. And these nuances in the self-discovery and relational realm are the places that I love to really dig into. And, you know, that concept that you just broke up, whenever I'm working with somebody that has a lot of relationally avoidant patterns from an attachment realm, and they've kind of like built a fortress around themselves with all these boundaries. You know, I have a boundary on this and this and this, and they're really yearning for intimacy and connection, and wanting to trust and lean towards others, but they're really not able to do that. So looking at their boundaries is often a really good place to start. You know, boundaries can oftentimes be disguised as defenses. So we want to be mindful that we're not using boundaries as a way to just kind of create the self-fulfilling prophecy that relationships aren't safe, that we can't trust. And it takes some digging into that to recognize where we each stand in that conversation.
That's so important. And I'm, a big, firm believer in boundaries. Earlier, last year, I think on the podcast, we had my friend who was like the boundary expert, Nedra Tawab. So I think boundaries getting a lot more traction. But I think that's such an important caveat that sometimes we create these very strict, rigid, tall, firm boundaries that actually prevent us from like engaging with people and having positive, healthy relationships. Along those lines, you said you work with people. Can you tell our audience like what it is you do and how you got to this work of helping people sort of break down, these barriers between their boundaries and defense mechanisms and things of that nature?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I got to this work in my 20s when I was an actress pursuing my own emotional expression through all these characters for quite a while, and got to the point where I'm like, wow, this is not quite scratching that itch. Something is just off here. And I started doing my own therapy, doing workshops to really kind of dig into what was, present for my own experience. Got a PTSD diagnosis, generalized anxiety disorder, and really started going down the mental health path. And, I think the intersection where I land, and I've worked with kids, teenagers, group homes, adults, couples, family dynamics, the whole shebang. And where I've landed now is really helping people kind of unpack their own unique ways they relate to others in relationships, both friendship and romantic, and that intersection between, self-discovery and relationship skills. Because I think that's oftentimes really missing in the social media space and the collective culture is, yes, it's beautiful to have self-awareness and to know oneself. It's very, very important.
Yeah.
But if we can't really bridge that to people that we're in relationship with, again, it goes back to the fortress conversation, right? That feeling of loneliness and isolation. So I really help people navigate that landscape of really taking that awareness of oneself and how to communicate their needs and boundaries in relationally sensitive ways, how to be vulnerable in a pacing that makes sense for you, but actually allows you to feel the closeness that you're looking for. And it's a very juicy place that I love to support people in.
It is juicy.
It is juicy.
So I think when people think about their relationships, and I'm not speaking of my own personal experience or anything like that, we tend to say our partner needs to change so that I can feel happy. My partner should be this way. I went to therapy because my partner needs to do this and that, right? And I think eventually we start to recognize, like, if we are trying to force or push our partner into something that they're not, that we're not accepting them. We're not loving them for who they are. And another thing that you said on your social media that I thought was really beautiful, and it's something I think we can all work more on, is may I continue to grieve my expectations of you so that I can discover your love yet again.
Ooh.
How do people build the awareness to recognize when they're focused so much on making the other person change rather than focusing on how they can accept and love the other person for who they are?
It's one of my favorite posts that I've written. So I'm honored that you chose that one, because I think it speaks to this kind of elevated, almost spiritual kind of love that in some ways we all kind of seek to have, that ability to be unconditional in our loving, but obviously with conditions, because all relationships need boundaries. But I think, so I was born in the Middle East. I was born in Saudi Arabia, and I'm Armenian ethnically, and I immigrated to the United States when I was 4. And I come with a whole other template for what relationships look like. My parents were arranged. They had an arranged marriage. And so, coming here and living this very bicultural experience, I really quickly realized that there is no right or wrong way to do relationship. And, I oftentimes work with my clients and helping them to just understand their relationship lens. What has shaped their lens? What conditioning have they had? Even looking at some of the relationship myths that were, being sold on social media at this point. I just did a live today with a colleague, Sabrina Zohar, talking about how to be a high value person and what requirements, I know. It's like,
I'd love to touch on that. Oh my God.
And it's so harmful, because I think it sets us up to really have these kind of expectations that are not realistic, and also takes away the work that goes beyond just attracting a person. That's the relationship skill building piece that involves tolerating differences, accepting the person for who they are, and really doing our own internal work to get there. And if we can't get there, if there's some kind of a deep incompatibility present, to recognize that, so that we are kind of moving away from maybe who is not a good fit. But there's a lot of work that I think we have to do on our own end in order to get to that place of acceptance.
Totally. And I think that's something really powerful there is, can we love and accept that other person? And can we love and accept ourselves and the needs that we have? And can we either come to an agreement within that dynamic, or maybe extending in that dynamic, or leaving that dynamic that allows us all to have what we need? Because I think a lot of us end up in a place of suppression of self in order to stay in a relationship, because it's the right thing to do. And the longer you're married, the happier you'll be, or the better, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. And that's just not true. I think the quality of your relationships is deeply determined by the quality of relationship you have to yourself and your capacity to offer that unconditional love to others. So yeah,
100%.
Thanks for highlighting that big time. You said high value. Okay, so I gotta be honest.
That is an activating term for me.
Most of our listeners are ladies in their 50s, 60s, 70s, right? We do a lot of work with people, helping them learn to move their bodies better and learn to love and accept themselves more. But man, when I do go on social media, I am bombarded with how to be a high value man so you can attract a high value woman, and it's like work out and make money and like all this
And be
stupid
tall.
stuff. And
Men need to be tall.
And you got to be 6 foot tall, right?
Yes. No, 6'2".
6'2", yeah. So much of this is like, it's just so superficial. It's not a connection. It's not something that you want to start a relationship over. What's your thoughts on being a high value man or woman?
Well, I think you said, Tyler, the piece perfectly within that is that it's so superficial oftentimes.
For sure.
And if you think about the people that you feel closest to in your life, or anybody that's listening to this, it's usually because there's an element of vulnerability that's connecting you. That's the glue of that relationship, right?
Yeah.
And vulnerability is the heartbeat of any relationship. Intimacy is actually created at the edge of vulnerability. The deeper we go in vulnerability and really sharing some of the things that scare us, that challenges us. So if a man is not making the money that he's supposed to make in this season of his life, and he's actually authentic and open about that, what does that mean? Does that mean he just gets kicked to the curb? So it's a very limiting and judgmental and critical way of viewing relationships that, again, is just not grounded in reality. It's very superficial.
Yeah.
This is going back to the goalpost. We talk about this a lot. Like the goalpost that society teaches us is like, look good, be successful, right? And that's what it means to be happy.
To be happy.
And at the end of the day, like how you become happy is you learn to deeply love and appreciate yourself and develop great connections with other people. And like that's what you're talking to. You're talking about vulnerability and depth and connection is what will make you be like, this is really why I'm alive, right? To enjoy and be in communion with other in this experience. And so yeah, it's so big. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, I literally hate that term, high value. I argue with people on the internet, for no reason at all because I don't have time, but I make time. And I argue about like if you're existing, you are a high value individual. Now perhaps that we're incompatible, or perhaps you do, or you have habits that just don't fit my lifestyle or my desires, but you're still a high value human. So yeah, I'm glad that came up. It was not planned, obviously, but I'm glad that came up. There was a post that you posted that I was actually very intrigued by, and it talked about love not being enough to counteract the work required in a relationship. That's a big one. And then the second part was oversharing not being enough to make up for your partner's lack of vulnerability. That post slapped me in the face in a good way. And I would love to hear more of your thoughts on that, especially the piece about, love not being enough, because I think, well, first of all, I don't necessarily know that we have the best definition of love, like the working definition.
Everybody's got one in their head.
Like
it's not the same.
So that, but also recognizing that having that love and affection for a person is not enough for like your relationship to like continue or be successful. I think that's a really important thing to discuss.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like there's those those attractive skills like that we teach that aren't always grounded in reality, or they don't actually nourish or sustain like a healthy relationship, quote unquote healthy, because who gets to also define healthy too?
Yeah.
But I do think that there are relationship skills that are required for relationships to have the potential to go the long haul. I do think that, if I work from an attachment perspective, and I'm really, when I'm working with an individual who's in a relationship, I'm always working with them, but have their partner or whoever they're in relationship, their partner is in the room with us. And I think a lot of times, we focus very much on the individual person, but we have to, again, that bridge to helping them create those skills. And so in long-term relationships, collaboration is a must, right? The ability to compromise, the ability to tolerate differences. And they're like secure functioning skills that are very different, again, skill set than just something that you might do on your own if you're in therapy or coaching or working someone on your own, self-awareness and discovery. How to be more vulnerable, how to open yourself up, even when there's a part of you that wants to shut down, how to engage the other person, how to listen. So I think that, the biggest thing is, learning how to be reciprocal and learning how to, share a space. There are all these different elements that, some of us may have learned and have strengths in, and there's other areas in which we are going to be confronted, no matter how good we think we are, the second we enter that more committed phase of relationships. I mean, you can manifest a partner all day long, but what are you going to do when they actually show up?
Ooh,
Yeah.
that's the key.
Yeah.
That is the key.
You mentioned you approach this from an attachment perspective. And we've had some people who focus on attachment theory on the podcast before, but for the people who are listening now and aren't aware of this, can you describe the attachment styles? And then maybe we could take a moment to unpack the challenges of each one and maybe some ways to help that would serve each one.
Absolutely. Yes. So that's a great follow-up on just kind of describing what they are to begin with. When I was in grad school, I remember we were taught all kinds of theories and modalities to work with people. And for some reason, the attachment map really it was like just fireworks whenever I heard it. And it's this concept of how our dynamic with our primary caregiver, the person that's really responsible for attuning to us, being able to recognize our child needs, make repairs really quickly, how that relationship unfolded is basically duplicated in our adult relationships. So a lot of those memories and experiences are implicit, meaning we don't have conscious awareness about them, but they can show up once we're in the second phase of romantic love. So in the beginning, you can override all that, the hormones and cocktails and chemicals. They basically allow us to bypass a lot of those emotional experiences.
How long does that phase last? How long, just real quick, so that people don't, because it's longer than they think, right?
It can be up to 2 years. You can be with someone for
Yeah.
like 2 years. That's why I usually say don't go to the next phase until don't lock it down until you've really been through a couple seasons of life together.
Wow, that's great advice.
That is great
Yeah.
advice.
Yeah, sorry.
Even if it's love at first sight, just wait, just hold on.
Yep. Okay, so after the honeymoon phase,
Yes.
then we start to experience our attachment styles.
You start relating to the person in the way you related to either your caregiver, and of course there's other elements too, the other people in your family system. It's not always just attachment based. There's culture, there's systemic pieces, there's a lot of aspects that shape our relationship experience. But from an attachment lens, if you had a very present and secure attachment, an attachment figure that was very attuned to your needs, made repairs quickly, and again, it's only 30% of the time is research is showing that is really what creates secure attachment. It doesn't mean, beat your child, the other 70%. That's not what it's saying, but it's saying that there's a lot of resilience when there's a good amount of that attunement. That creates a lot of secure patterning. If you have a parent that's the primary caregiver that's kind of on and off, maybe they were really present some of the time, but very disengaged, maybe, worked a lot, or, for reasons that were out of their control, caused them to not be available, that can create anxiety for someone. And then for a caregiver that was very misattuned emotionally or disregarded a child's emotions, or really there was a sense of neglect, they can experience a lot of avoidant attachment behaviors. And these things can show up in their adult relationships. And part of the work that I do with clients and that, attachment is all about is helping them to create corrective healing experiences. And that first step is knowing, how do you relate? Do you feel generally trusting and you can lean towards that collaborative experience with people? Do you tend to have more anxiety and are always afraid of emotional or physical abandonment? Do you have more of those avoidant behaviors where you kind of had to be a little bit of a fortress because nobody was engaged or attuned to you, and you kind of were left on your own a lot as a kid? So why would you trust in relationship, right? But then you feel lonely and you don't get the intimacy that you long for as an adult. So I'll stop there and let you guys kind of.
Man,
Yeah.
I didn't learn about attachment styles until about 4 years ago, right?
same.
And prior to that, my methodology to connect with my partner, who's a little bit avoidant and me a little bit anxious, was like, if I smother her more, she'll come, she'll want to be with me more, right? Which is like nothing further from the truth than that. When I started to understand this, it took a year or so before I could change my actual behavior, and still struggle with that, to be honest. But it finally made me realize that like the way that I feel love, the way that I feel connection is not at all the same as my partner. And it's such an important thing, I think, for us to recognize, because if I just say, hey, I need connection and physical touch, and like I want to be smothered, you know what I mean? But if I do that to you, you feel like, get the hell away from me, I'm not going to do this. And so it's like, how do I learn to offer the other what they need? How do they learn to offer me some of what I need? And that's the compromise and the understanding of yourselves and each other that you just shared about as well. So, when somebody's struggling with one of these attachment styles, maybe they're the anxious one who's pursuing and I need more, and or the avoidant one, like, get away from me. What are the ways and tools that you offer them to help them develop more secure relationships?
Such a great question, and thank you for sharing your personal, experience. It sounds like you're the human golden retriever in your relationship. I love that. And back to your question that you were asking about, when we kind of overshare and are like overgiving in the relationship, how do we know if it's going to be reciprocated, or what do we do with that? Usually, when I'm working with clients that have a lot more of the anxious tendencies, they really want that connection. So they're oftentimes like turning themselves inside out to create that connection.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to get that person to necessarily engage back. So they might continue sharing or sharing more. Okay, they didn't respond to that vulnerability. Let me keep going. And it can be, really stemming from this dysregulated place So taking that time to just know that about yourself, right? Like, okay, when I feel anxious, I tend to lean way too far in. I struggle to give somebody space. And how can I engage with them in a different way that honors their attachment patterning style, but also is very clear about what my needs are, to see if we can find that middle space? Because I don't think the pain point fully ever goes away. Like, I still live with both anxious and avoidant tendencies sometimes, but just naming it and putting the words to describe it, and then being able to see if there's a way to get the needs met enough on both sides is a really important skill to cultivate. Imagine if I was working on my self-development, I was saying, well, you know what? I've tried to be vulnerable. I've done this, this, and this, but they're not meeting me. But we're not making maybe space for the other person to go at a pace that's a little bit more honoring for them. Or how can I approach them in a way that says, you know, I've noticed I've shared a lot. I'm going to take a pause. I would love to hear more about your experience with this. What comes up for you? And to start kind of assessing, is this person even willing to go vulnerable? Because some people aren't. They're great listeners, but they're not down for that. And that might not work for somebody that has more anxious tendencies, who really values deep, deep connection oftentimes.
That's big. I feel like sometimes in a relationship, the dynamic can feel mismatched because you're at different paces in your growth.
Yeah.
And like, I know that in my own experience, there's been times where my partner was stretching me and I was like, stop it. And then times when I'm stretching my partner and she's like, what are you doing? Right. And I think it's really hard. Like, and so much of this comes back to, at least for me, the self-awareness. Like, what am I doing? Like, what decisions am I making, and how is that impacting this dynamic? And recognizing when it may not be serving the dynamic, and pausing to say, okay, what am I needing in this moment? Am I able to communicate that well? Are they able to say yes or no from an honest place, an authentic place? Yeah. And then am I choosing to do what I need to do with that information in order to make a better decision for myself? I got another post for you because this one's big. I think
all over your posts.
Piggybacking on this, yeah, they're all great. Piggybacking on this subject of like maybe not being at the same pace. Another thing that I think is really common in relationships is we start out with good intentions and we come in and say, hey, you know, I need more of this from you, or this hurt me when this happened, right? Or something starts like that. And the other person goes, well, that's because you did this. And the other person's like, that's because you did that, and blah, blah. And then it just becomes this like comparison of pain. And I think one of the things I've learned big time the last few years is like, let's focus on one thing at a time. Let's focus on one person at a time. And this post you wrote was, validating your loved one's pain, even when you don't understand it, is a love language. And as you mentioned already, vulnerability is the thread that weaves us together. And if someone's vulnerable and you're like, well, that's a stupid thing to be, you know, mad about, like, you're going to kill the connection, right? And speaking from personal experience. And so how do people cultivate the ability to actually offer authentic love and validation, even if you don't agree, even if you don't understand it?
Yeah.
How do we get past our need to be right, you know, and instead just be with them?
Yeah, this is another one of those, I think, spiritual practices that really calls us to operate from like almost like, how do I want to show up in this relationship versus how maybe the wounded parts of me are wanting to show up. I remember, you know, my husband and I early on in the relationship, I know I wasn't great when I would express my hurt. I'm sure I was blaming and critical and all the things. And, you know, I remember I would get upset about something specific, and it would be hard for him to be able to be validating and comforting because my come from was really harsh. I don't blame him. Yeah. And there's also times where you might bring up something that's hurtful, but then you notice your partner is actually feeling shame. So you might have to put your own thing aside for a moment to tend to the other person. And I think we can oftentimes, especially if we grew up in a family system where we were not seen and we were not validated, when we're in conflict, that desire to feel seen and validated is going to feel very intense and almost like if there's a primitive feeling to it, like, I feel like this desperation, I need to feel seen. It can feel threatening to not feel seen. So just recognizing that that's normal, understanding how your family system may have operated, if they were very invalidating or neglectful of your emotions, that's probably going to be a sensitive place for you. Yeah. And just, again, that self-awareness piece so that you can bridge it towards the relationship. And start to question yourself. Why is it so hard for me to validate my partner when they come to me? What's that about? Like really asking yourself that question. Well, maybe because I never received validation. Why should I give it to them? I never got it. And so it becomes like this very tit for tat dynamic
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
Like a competition, right?
exactly.
My pain's bigger than your pain.
Exactly. And it's almost like, well, what's going to serve the relationship? That the relationship is a third entity.
Yeah.
And if I'm going to tend to my partner, if they're feeling shame, even though I was upset, and it's really hard, what I'm suggesting is really hard to do. But if you can go there and trust that your partner is eventually going to come back and also be willing to be soothing and validating and reassuring, it's like almost like we have to take that leap of trust before we can build that trust for that to show up. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. And I struggle with this a little bit because, and I have a question for you in moving forward in new relationships following divorce. I'm in the process of divorcing. And I think that these skills that you're talking about, they're so brilliant and they're so useful when you have the right partner.
Yes.
And so I think for me, what I struggled to see in remaining in a relationship probably longer than maybe I should have, maybe would have been a little less hurt or maybe not. But when you recognize that this is not serving either of you, or maybe it is serving the other person, but it's not serving you anymore. And you're utilizing these skills and these strategies to show up for another person and try to understand their position and how they feel, but recognizing, I guess, at some point you're losing a good portion of yourself along the way. And so I guess I just wonder when you're working with your clients, how you, I know you don't tell people like, oh, you should probably get a divorce, but like how you, how you help them see when they've gotten to a point where like you've done the things, you've utilized the strategies, and you're not getting any reasonable response for it. So maybe it's time to reevaluate if this is the relationship for you.
Such a great question. And you know, this kind of in between liminal place is one of my favorite ways of working with clients when they're in that exploration of deciding, because it's hard, it's confusing, you don't want to walk away unless you feel like you've given it your all, but also like you said, when you're not feeling met, this is just so painful. And so there's a couple of things that I like to address with clients that are in that decision place, in that moment, and that's, let's get you to show up in the most loving, aligned, supportive way that we can. Let's really, really see if we are setting this relationship up for potential success. And that will look like, okay, have I been clear about my needs? Have I been clear about the boundaries? Have I been generous? Have we created agreements as a couple that is going to enable us to create a corrective healing experience?
You got to unpack that one.
Yeah,
that's
that's
big.
key.
Because I feel like even when I hear the word agreements, I'm like, rarely do I meet a couple that made conscious agreements coming into their relationship. And so they have an understanding of each other's expectations and values and places maybe they disagree but accept each other otherwise. So, you know, like how do people even get started with that? Like this agreements part of a relationship.
This is one of the hugest pitfalls of couples not working out. I think you're working from a structural component where you're creating. I love the way Dr. Stantaken, who's one of the attachment, he's phenomenal in the attachment space. He talks about you're creating the eco space of you and your partner. There's a million methodologies and things that you should do and how to be in relationships, but ultimately, whoever you are with, whether it's one person or three or more, you guys have to create that ecosystem, the structure. And the biggest thing to keep in mind is you all are going to have your own unique vulnerabilities. How are we going to anticipate those vulnerabilities, and what agreements do we need to put in place to protect ourselves from each other and the relationship as a whole? So that might look like, even though when I come home from work, I really need my time to my space, to myself, but my partner gets, really anxious when I do that. Can we find an agreement that works for both of us? Maybe I spend an hour or two alone, but then we have connection time together. That's an agreement that we create. It doesn't mean there's no flexibility or rigidity, but that meets both of each other's needs and vulnerabilities. So fidelity agreements, people just assume they know what cheating is in a relationship. We don't,
That's true.
What I might view as cheating and flirting and this and that might look very different than what my husband, and if it did, and we've had to create our own agreements. And this is hard because it feels like, well, it should just be compatible and aligned and you should just know what to do, but it's not realistic.
Yeah.
And sometimes we are growing while we're in a relationship with someone, and the paths of like our values can drastically change. You can be with someone and start off a certain way and end up in very, very different places. You might have a life-altering experience. You might leave a religious experience. So I don't think you can create these agreements without flexibility and without the reality that any relationship can end no matter how
You gotta
potent
revisit
these
them.
things are.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's painful. Divorce and relationship endings are, oh my gosh, they confront so many parts of us and all the secondary losses that come up for the ride, our identity. There's a
Yeah.
lot of pieces in that space.
For the people out there who have trouble connecting with themselves and identifying what makes them feel loved and, their own needs, how do you help them understand that so they can make agreements? Because I think what I've witnessed is sometimes people have no idea what they need, no idea what makes them feel loved, and then it's time to make agreements and they're just like, well, I don't know, like, what do you think? Right? And that's not an actual agreement coming from both places. That's, just more like, hey, I don't have a good connection to myself, so I'm just going to go with whatever the people around me think is right. And that's no way to live.
Yeah, I mean, if let's say we were a parentified child where we were constantly tending to the needs of a parent and we had to detach from our own experience, that can be a really common experience where somebody is like, I don't have the right to have needs. Like there's almost like a morality piece there that can be attached to that, or even a feeling of shame. Like I know when I started expressing, I wouldn't express my needs. I would just opt out. I'm like, peace, I have to show up and express my needs. I'm not doing that. I would have so much shame, and I would just leave relationship after relationship. I'm like, well, this sucks. Why can't I get like? So I think just understanding. Everyone has needs. Everyone has relational needs. Everyone has boundaries. But if you were raised in an environment of autonomy and self-reliance and self-sufficiency, then it's going to be harder. And here in the West, freedom, all that, that's what we're indoctrinated in. So I do have a needs list that I work with people on, and we kind of go through them and think about, okay, well, if you could have a need, which one of these kind of speaks to you? Or
Oh, I love that question. If you could have a need,
if you
which
could have
one
a
of these
need.
speaks to you? It's like the
If you
question
could
after the question.
imagine needing something, what might it be?
That's good. I like that.
it's like
like
a
that.
sideways approach, right?
Yeah. I love that.
Usually I have to do that with my clients that have more avoidant attachment patterns because it can feel really confronting. Because if I say I have a need and then it doesn't get met, then that's another feeling of rejection.
Like a disappointment, yeah. It's like you're trying not to get disappointed, so you don't even ask for what you need. So,
Oh, that breaks my heart.
yeah,
That's
you don't
so
even want to
sad.
put that on anybody else because why? Why? And I've experienced that before. My selfish ask today from you, I saw you do a lot of work about helping people, date in an empowered way. And a brief history of my story. I was married for 17 years. Our marriage began in my 20s, my young 20s. We were very conservative, very religious. Maybe 6-7 years in, we started to have some differences and issues, and we actually left our sort of religious sitting. He was a minister, and we sort of walked away from that. And my hope and thought was that we would establish other spiritual practices to, supplement that and to sort of pour into our children. We have 3 children, and that never happened. And what I literally witnessed is us drifting further and further and further apart. And there was infidelity, emotional neglect, and abuse, and just tons of things that it was a lot. And going through that and kind of getting the wherewithal within myself to let go of societal expectations, let go of religious expectations, let go of the dream of what I wanted my family to be and look like, and the happy family, that took years, like, to unravel that and to finally just say, like, this is no longer where I'm supposed to be. I'm ready for the next journey. And now, in healing those things and working through healing, going through therapy, a lot of time in prayer and meditation, feeding my own needs and putting myself first in a very new way, I am starting to date. I'm very excited, and I've had some positive experiences. But I guess I would love to know, for myself and anyone listening who is maybe in this space as well, how do we get back into that scene, that dating scene, from a very empowered and well prepared, I guess. I know you can't avoid all the things. I fully expect my feelings will get hurt from time to time, or I won't have great experiences every time. But how do you sort of approach it from a confident and empowered perspective, especially when, this is something new after like 20 plus years of not being there? So,
Well, I want to just first acknowledge.
Pause. I'm sorry. We have to pause.
What? I'm just getting this message that, it's
Oh, it's not
we're
us?
good.
Okay, sorry. We thought there was an issue. Okay, we're good. So I asked the question. You can go ahead and start your answer. Yeah.
Well, what I want to say first and foremost, I'm so glad that you gave yourself years after your relationship ending, because I think there is this kind of weird pressure in the collective of, like, just get back out there, get back on the dating horse. And, being in a relationship for that long, and the intertwining of your dynamic and kids and religion and spirituality, there's so many pieces. Relationship endings are a milestone, and they really deserve to be honored and respected, and especially in a grief illiterate culture that, definitely the U.S. is. I just really want to really honor that process for you first and foremost, and just how much there is, like you said, to unpack from that place. And the fact that you have spent so much time doing that is beautiful. And, from a relationship ending, there's a lot of wisdom and information there to learn about oneself, right? It's like the biggest portal when I'm working with a client we go into to recognize, okay, what are the things that really didn't work? And obviously, like we talked about, a little bit ago, that growing apart is sometimes just, there's no matter, even if you do everything perfectly, that still happens.
Right.
And so, I think spending time thinking about what are your most core relational needs. And I like to say to people, this is 2 to 3 things, guys, not 25 things.
Not a long
I was about to
list
get my
in
notebook out.
journal.
Damn.
Okay. 2 to 3 that are unique to you. So if I'm
Okay.
working with someone from an attachment perspective, for example, if I'm working with someone that has strong anxious patterning, consistency is usually something that comes up a lot. They need that predictability, that consistency. They need somebody who really reaches for them and makes efforts. So they don't feel like they're the ones that are always, inviting. So there are specific things to kind of our attachment framing that can be really significant. So there's 2 to 3 there. And then I would also say, think about what relationship values you want your relationship to be anchored on. So you said spirituality, you said a couple of things. Maybe that's present for you, maybe not. But just spending some time thinking about, this is kind of like what your relationship is going to be built on. This is the foundation of values. I just worked with a client who, justice and equality is really important for her. But, if she dates people that don't value that, that's going to be a really challenging foundation to start the relationship on.
Right.
So really, I think we feel empowered when we know what we need, and we know that if it is not a good fit, it's generally because there's some kind of a lack of alignment there. And, being able to tolerate those misalignments, the feelings of rejection, that's, of course, that's going to be there with anybody. But I do think there's something empowering that comes along for the ride when we can be authentic, even if we get rejected. It's like, okay, I gave this my all. Ooh, I was true. I let it all. I let everything out on the table. This wasn't a match for whatever reason, and so that self-knowing, I think, is huge, and really bringing up those needs and boundaries early. I mean, early. So you can see, how does somebody respond to my needs? Are they dismissive? Are they invalidating? Or my boundaries, are they pushy? Are they, those are just a couple of things that can help you approach dating in a little bit more of an empowered way to begin with. Any other
Yeah.
kind of questions on that?
No, I think that was very helpful,
I got
I
a
do.
question for that.
I just want to clarify. So I'm still in the process of my divorce, but what I noticed is that the knowing when it was over happened many years before, and then the grieving and the process of actually uncoupling, when you have a home and children. So it takes a while. But as a result of that, just, as a nod to what you're saying, I'm nowhere near the place where my dating is for the purpose of like a new partner. Like I am just out here collecting data and trying to, reestablish myself and learn who I am and learn what I like and what I don't like. I don't believe that I would be ready after such a long relationship. And I could be wrong, but I feel right now I don't know that I would be anywhere near ready for something like serious again. So I'm trying to approach dating from the perspective of like things that I maybe didn't do younger, because I was like ready, growing up in a very Christian, very religious household. It's like, and it wasn't even a household. I was just a very Christian, religious person, but it was kind of like the goal. You get married, you have some kids, you start a family. And so now I feel like this new season of dating is just about me, enjoying and meeting people and engaging with people and learning about myself. So, but no, I think everything that you said makes sense, and it feels, applicable to this sort of new phase for sure.
You mentioned something that I feel like there's a little bit of a juxtaposition on, and I want to get clarity for people who are in this experience. So this honeymoon phase is a phase where we tend to not maybe express every part of ourselves to another person, or maybe we show up for another person in a way that we won't be able to do forever because we're doing it, in that honeymoon phase. And at the same time, you said bringing up these needs and these boundaries and these values early. And so how do you know if the person that you're doing this with is authentic? Or perhaps maybe they're anxious and they're showing up for your needs because they're feeling anxious, not because that's what they really want to offer.
I don't think you can know, Tyler.
Ooh!
That's what I thought. That's what I thought the answer was going to be.
I was hoping it would be something with shiny sprinkles and everything on top,
She's giving you a game plan. Like, this is how you know. No, go ahead.
That's the leap of faith we take, and that's the we hopefully take calculated risks with people, and there's certainly getting to know a person's friends, family members, kind of gauging how they are in that way, and showing up vulnerably and open and authentically ourselves so that they can meet us in that place. But I mean, I've worked with people who have dated, and then 2 years down the line, they've been a psychopath. So, I'm not saying that to scare people, but I do think I say that because I think we assume a lot of responsibility for others, right?
We do. Yeah.
Like, this is my fault.
Yeah, and it's like we are not responsible for if somebody was covering up who they are and not showing us their authentic self.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's painful. I mean, sitting with the feelings of manipulation or whatever else can come up can be really painful and scary, but all you can do is really focus on our side of the street, your side of the street, and hope that the other person is, if you feel like a weird feeling when, you can feel a lack of resonance or an inauthenticity. Sometimes we can pick up on those messaging. I remember a friend of mine her face would show a very specific thing, but she would express very differently. I felt and this was something she was aware about herself, so we could talk about it and this kind of disconnect, but there's sometimes cues we can recognize, but there's also just, giving it time and and seeing what unfolds.
Sylvie, I'm glad you said that, because some time ago we had Dr. Ramani on the podcast talking about narcissism, and one of the things she kept bringing up was how people shame themselves so bad when they end up in these relationships with these people. And there's a lot of rhetoric in the world about accountability and taking ownership of your part and looking at your role in the situation. And I understand relationships are require more than one person, and so yes, we all have a role to play, but sometimes we engage with people who are sneaky and manipulative and very good at masking who they are, and sitting in shame around like, oh, I wish I had figured it out. I wish I had the checklist to make sure next time. And it's like, that's when we are being authentic and open and vulnerable, we are putting ourselves at risk 100% because we cannot be responsible for other people's actions and behaviors. So I'm glad to hear that echoed again, because I do think sometimes, people who do relationship work, they want to split the responsibility like 50-50, and that's not what it looks like sometimes. Sometimes people are being manipulated and being hurt by people who have their own set of issues and traumas and whatever, but it's very clear cut what is happening here. And as the victim in that scenario, you can't you can't always be like, oh, I was responsible because I didn't notice it earlier, or because I didn't, I wasn't attuned to this one thing. It's like, we're just trying to be good to people and show up, So thank you for that,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I got one final question for you today. And since you work with people in this capacity of improving their connection with self and their relationships, if you only had the ability to give one piece of advice to anybody who ever came to you in the future, based on your experience right now, what one piece of advice would you think you would give to people to improve their relationship with themselves and others?
That's a big question,
deep.
Tyler.
That is
You only
a
get
big
one.
question.
You only get one.
One piece of advice.
I don't know if this is. I have no idea what's about to come out of my mouth. So let's see where it goes.
All right.
think
I like it. That's how every great conversation starts.
I think the thing that comes up for me is almost like pay attention to whether or not the way you're showing up in the world is creating the kind of relationships you're wanting to create. And again, not from a place of like judging yourself or being hard on yourself, but really looking at the areas where you can really build on your own strengths. God, I have no freaking idea, Tyler. This is a
This is good.
That was so good. Keep going with
No,
that.
don't
Keep
give
going
up
with
on
that.
it. Don't give up on it.
Yeah.
Ride the thread. Yeah.
Gosh.
What I'm hearing you say there is like show up and be an authentic, great version of yourself, and like really know yourself. And then when you go out in the world, I feel like it's a lot easier for you to look at
To
people
attract
and
that.
understand, this is a person I'm attracted to, and this is a person I'm not attracted to. And it's the thing we have control over. We don't have control over what other people do. We only have control over how we feel about ourselves and how we spend our time in connecting with ourselves.
I
don't
like
know.
the way you
Did
said
that
it a
come
lot better, though.
No, it was good. Well, because I
take zero credit.
What I think you were saying exactly. It's like be what you want. Like be what you want to attract. It's like what we say: be the difference you want to see in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like be what it is you want from other people, and knowing yourself, knowing your needs and your desires and stuff. So, I think that's brilliant advice, and it's still hard because it takes a lot of steps. It's not like a quick thing, but I don't think any of the good stuff that we get out of this life are super quick anyway. So
Yeah. Sylvie, this has been a fun conversation, and I know our listeners are going to benefit greatly from it. If they want to find you and find out more about what you do, where can they find you?
I would say the first place to look is my Instagram page, where I post relationship tips, tools daily, and I won't say it because my last name is hard to pronounce. And then my website, where if anyone's interested in working with me one-on-one, I also have some self-paced online courses that really digs into boundaries and relationship skills like dating, empowered dating. So those are two spaces that you can stay connected to my work. Thank you guys
go ahead
so
and
much.
you're welcome. Go ahead and say your last name because I think I know how to pronounce it. I want to see if I'm right. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Silvy Khoucasian.
Oh, I was very wrong.
It
Okay,
was
but no.
close.
I tried, but no, but that's good. I think people do need to know your entire name. So thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
And I know our listeners will benefit from connecting with you in some way.
Yeah.
Thank you
Thanks for their
both.
time.
Thank you so much.